Tell us again, William, if you don't mind, about the age class of deer that you guys are harvesting down there.
79% of our buck harvest is 3-year-old and old.
80%. HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, we've been using Deer Grow products for a long time. The Plot Start and Plot Boost, more recently Plot Till. Now we've got 3 new liquid fertilizers that have been put in the mix that will cover everything we could want for a food plot program.
It's huge, man. The more food plotting we do, it's like, man, the liquids just make sense. Like whether it's herbicides or the Plot Start and Plot Boost, and now the fertilizers getting mixed in. It's like, man, I can combine all of those in certain cases and do less passes for more results.
I mean, it's all about efficiency. I mean, like you said, less passes. If you're out there treating your beans with glyphosate in the summertime, you can mix in this fertilizer, do that all at once. You have the boost in there that helps the metabolism. It's all about efficiency when we're talking about food plots. And really the big difference on these liquid fertilizers is you're bypassing some of these soil limitations, pH limitations, the soil type. In a lot of cases, we talk about dry fertilizers only being available for 17% of what you put down in the first year. These liquid fertilizers straight into the plant are 90% available in the first year. Huge difference in what you're going to see in growth.
It's huge. And so right now you can use code HUNTR15 for 15% off any of the Deer Grow products on their website. And as always,
better food plots, bigger deer. And we're back.
Hey,
HUNTR Podcast, episode 227. As Nick keeps us in line, he's editing.
Oh, what is the mindset for today?
Well, the mindset is it's December 12th when we're recording this.
12th, indeed.
I think this is going out next week, right? We're like back in real time.
Yeah, we're real time.
So this is Tuesday the 17th. It's Harlan's birthday.
Real time and winding down here. We talked about it, but at some point here, we'll probably trickle back to one a week here even.
Yeah, I think right after the first of the year is what we're thinking. We're gonna try to carry you through Christmas, and then after the first of the year, we'll go back to one.
We'll back it down. We'll give you guys little breaks, a little palate cleanser. So, but we'll keep everything else rolling. So, and in the meantime, we appreciate you guys being here and listening, whether on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. All those are great. We have been dropping these episodes on Tuesday and Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Once we shift back to one a week, they'll still be the Tuesday nights.
Tuesday 6. Yep.
And if you've written us on Instagram, DM, or the website, those are the 2 that we check most frequently. And if you noticed the other day, I
saw
all the emails.
Was like,
we're totally up to date.
Who has been infiltrating my territory?
Totally up to date on the email inbox. And Instagram, I think we're getting there as well, too.
We're getting there.
Yeah, appreciate you guys reaching out. We have some merch on the website. I'm probably wearing a hat right now, right? Jeremy, for sure, as I can see his. So
Uomo?
Currently out of stock on the water bottles, but we should be back in fairly short order.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm glad you guys ordered some. I got my Dying Breed and Uomo sticker on there.
Yeah, pretty cool. We appreciate you guys supporting us in that way, and Nick does as well because that's how he gets paid. And
buy more hydration devices.
And here we go.
Like I said, it's December the 12th. If you're listening to this, it's the 17th. Happy birthday, Harlan. He is 9 years old today.
9 and 11 still?
9 and 12.
12?
Carter's 12. He'll be 13 in March.
Big age. Wow, 13.
Yeah, wow, huh? Crazy.
Yeah,
I
try to remember what I was doing at 13. What grade is that?
He's 7th right now.
Oh, yeah. First kiss.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
I was trying to think.
You went to public school, right?
Oh, yeah.
Were kids like making out down at your at the bus stop? That was the thing? 13, that's about when it started.
No, my bus stop. I didn't have cool kids at the bus stop. Actually, it was
just
they
a
bunch.
Cool.
I think it was just a bunch of dudes.
It
was just a bunch of dudes. So I hope not.
Well, it wasn't the bus stop. It was like going to the buses at the end of the day. That was when the fights would happen too.
Oh yeah. Oh, so like out of the school. Yeah, for sure.
Saw some of the best fights of my life that year.
I think I played so much sports. Like
nobody knew how to block.
I never, yeah, they didn't. I never really like rode the normal bus home. I was always on the
short bus.
I was on the, yeah, I had to wear a seatbelt.
Wow. With all the other crossbow kids.
Yeah. Oh shit, that's funny.
Bummer. Wait, what bus were you on?
The activity bus.
Oh yeah. Because you were playing sports.
Yeah, so whatever sports was, played it, activity bus home.
Sports. I'm good at sports.
Short bus. Yeah. Anyways, yep, mid-December. So we kind of were like, whoa, we're at that time. It's like, what do we do? We're trying to figure out if we're like still hunting or we want deer to make it through. And then it's like, well,
I'm sorry to interject there. I've taken kind of a little bit of a break
from hunting.
I haven't
divorced or?
Well, I haven't hunted since my last trip to Illinois.
Yeah, I mean,
because the gun seasons come in right after, and so we just kind of got into like a surveillance, get them through type of a mode.
Today's Thursday 12th. I'm hunting tomorrow morning here in Pennsylvania. I'm gonna go up on the mountain. I just want to walk around the woods for a while. I need a good clear. So I'm gonna put a gun on my shoulder. I'm gonna go deep. I do have one really good buck on camera, and I've got that velvet kind of weird looking deer. I'd probably shoot either of them.
That's in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to go out tomorrow morning. It's going to be super cold, like 15 degrees. I'm just going to hunt until lunchtime.
Cool. That sounds great.
Walk around. Just put some miles on, scout. Maybe have a couple cameras in the pack. I don't know. But yeah, other than that, I haven't. Ohio, I've kind of just left be. I sent you that picture.
You sent me Slammer.
Yeah, Slammer. So I'm glad he's made it through.
Throw a drop.
Yeah, I know. Kentucky... I still have same kind of deer on my new farm. I might take the kids out next weekend down there. I think it's muzzleloader season. So I might hunt them for a day down there.
I think my scheme in the interim is I need
to shoot some does.
We're going to do that.
Yeah, with Doe Fest.
I do want to, part of me still believes there's a buck in Ohio that I would shoot. So I may go move some cameras around like in the next week.
I want to shoot one in Pennsylvania. If I don't shoot one tomorrow, then I ordered all my new gear. I'm going to be hardcore with my flintlock after Christmas, which will be fun. I can't hit the broadside of a barn with that thing, but it'll be fun to try to kill one with it.
Yeah, cool.
Or my recurve. I still have that I could probably go kill one in Kentucky with my recurve. I've decided I'm not going to shoot that 5-year-old. I'm going to let him go for the rest of the year. Just let him be. And that 3-year-old's out there too. I'm just going to let them be on the new farm. Hopefully see some new bucks show up with the food and everything at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got some deer that I've been watching on behind my cabin that I could see myself shooting one with a stick and string.
I'm starting to get excited too about like looking forward to next season. We got some management projects here and stuff. But
dude, my brain is already overlapping. I told somebody this the other day. I'm like, I'm still in this season,
half out.
But I'm also like already like, what are the projects? What do I need to get done? Chainsaw season is not very far away. Like I know that son of a gun's got to get roaring in a couple spots.
Dipping back into I bought a farm.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. We'll leave it for we'll leave it for the next one because it's just us. But maybe we'll talk about the new structure that's gonna come out here after New Year's. So one thing that is not slowing down is deer hunting is hot right now in the South, and we neglect.
So hot right now.
You're so hot. Hansa's so hot. We neglect the South a lot in this podcast because we talk about obviously Pennsylvania and Ohio and the Midwest, and I've spent a lot of time and have a lot of really good relationships in Mississippi, and I've mentioned it I think a few times that they're doing it right down there. And whether it's just like overlooked or not,
the deer don't get as big. That's why it doesn't get as much attention.
Yeah,
it's just the subspecies is down there.
And it's the South, it's just people don't think. But as we start talking about age and understanding what these guys are doing, we've got William McKinley, who's the deer program leader for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks on today. And, William's going to shed some pretty cool light on when you start thinking about it on the states that we hunt, you're like, what the heck are we doing up here? Because these guys are way ahead of us in management. Yeah. Not only from a state level, but from a deer hunter public opinion level. They're miles ahead of the general hunting public in the Midwest and Northeast. So it'll be cool to kind of talk to William about what Mississippi's doing, some of the data that they're collecting, their relationship with my alma mater, Mississippi State, and kind of how they use those guys. And yeah, I think it's a good initial discovery for us in the South of is this a state that is actually doing things to make the deer herd, better overall, not just in numbers, but age structure and everything else in between? Maybe. And then how do we apply that to our states that we're hunting?
Let's get them on. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt.
What can we say, man? Another year back with Hoyt. We're both shooting RX8s. I'm shooting 70 pounds in the bourbon, which I love bourbon.
That's great.
And you're shooting 80 pounds in the straight black.
Blacked out as always, man. I got so I'm shooting the 500 grain Easton Arrow this year. And at 80 pounds, I'm flinging that thing at like 300 feet per second. I mean, it's deadly. Put a water buffalo in front of me and he's done.
I mean, we shot it earlier. You literally put an arrow through a brand new target, like never been shot before.
I know. So one other thing that Hoyt is doing this year is they're making all their own strings in-house. And so the quality is top notch, and it just really is something that is setting them apart from their competitors.
Well, what we always try to do when we go to our bow shop, Ultimate Outdoors, is we try to shoot other bows just to make sure that we are really giving everybody a fair chance. The reality is it's a no-brainer. Hoyt stands above all of them every single time.
Definitely. And so right now you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, for 20% off any apparel on the Hoyt website. And as always,
get serious, get Hoyt. W, what's up, buddy?
Hey, man. We're just down here in the middle of deer season.
I know, man.
That's actually cold.
Is it?
So we're below freezing this morning. Barely, but we were at 29, and deer are moving. People are harvesting deer, and we're right in the middle of it right now. The rut's just kicking in North Mississippi, just about to kick in Central Mississippi down, and we're living it up.
Isn't that wild? I was just telling him, like, we're all, you know, I mean, if not done completely, I mean, for sure on the back half of, like, we're, you know, rut hunting's pretty much wrapped up, and like you hear about guys going down to like. But
well, that's why I thought it'd be good to have William on. Is that we're well overdue to talk to him, and just because I think Mississippi Department of Wildlife does so many things so well that people in the Midwest and Northeast just don't think about.
Listen to this statistic. Listen to statistic out of the gate. Tell us again, William, if you don't mind, about the age class of deer that you guys are harvesting down there.
79% of our buck harvest is 3-year-old and older.
80%. That's ridiculous.
80% of ours is 1.5.
50% of that is 4-year-old and older.
One more time.
How many?
50% is 4-year-old and older. So we're harvesting a lot of mature deer down here. A lot.
Unreal, man.
So
yeah, I mean,
we still need hunters.
And this is what we were talking about when you walked in. This is a bait state.
I know.
Mississippi is.
Yeah.
So we were discussing. I was like, okay, well, you know, and I guess we can kind of get into that here.
Yeah, we'll just let her up. We're just going. Let's just rip.
All right, cool. Well, why don't you let William, if you don't mind, we are recording now. Can you introduce yourself just to our listeners and your credentials, who you are to the state of Mississippi, and so on and so forth?
Sure. William McKinley. I'm the deer program coordinator with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. I have been with our agency now for a little over 23 years and been in the deer program 21 years of that.
For everybody else, we call him W.
Yeah. Oh, really? W? I asked him in the beginning. He's like, it's William.
Yeah.
W.
Yeah. No, I mean, William and I have known each other since when did I get to state? 07, I think, is when I was at state.
Yeah.
So, so you were in deer program at that point, but not very long, a handful of years at that point. And so, when I was at Mississippi State, obviously, and this was part of this discussion we have, but we had a very, very close relationship with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife and Fisheries Parks. Still do, right? I mean, it's still
absolutely
very tied in.
So close, I would add that you may be familiar, you may know that Dr. Damaris just recently retired.
Yes, he did.
And we were, as our agency, and in this case, me, was asked to come and sit in on the interview panel and participate in the interview process for the candidates. And that's how closely we work together as the university, the MSU Deer Lab, and the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. It is, I would argue, probably one of the best state agency university relationships out there in wildlife conservation.
I would agree with that. It was pretty exciting to go down there and start to work on projects at the university for my master's that, William and the team at MDWF&P were using as like applicable management things. Like we were literally trying to figure out things that the deer hunters of Mississippi wanted to know. Mm-hmm. And it was like, this is pretty foreign for everything that I've talked to.
What, you're going to use real information to make decisions?
Yeah, like the hunter
weird.
The hunter said, hey, we want to know essentially like why the deer on the coastal plain are small, and if we, let them age and we feed them the same thing, can they get to be the size of the Delta deer? And they're like, okay, cool, let's catch them from all over the place and do that. Like that, it was literally hands-on, applicable and practical management from a university and a state management system. And yeah, I'd never heard of it before.
W was telling us earlier, if I can call you W,
I will allow it.
For this conversation, like that DMAP actually originated in, and the whole premise for it originated in Mississippi as well, and that's been taken and applied to, every state that uses it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jacobson was one of the first guys in there. Dr. Harry Jacobson.
He was, and even prior to Jacobson, that program was arising. And I hear the stories of the older biologists when I came on. We're talking about it then, and when they first went to those counties in East Central Mississippi to start discussing doe harvest, this was a big no-no, y'all.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you mean doe harvest? And our biologists went and actually carried multiple law enforcement officers, conservation officers with them, and left the car running, I will add, in case they had to make a quick getaway. But that is the night that DMAP was actually born. And it started as a partnership between deer managers, landowners, and the state agency, in which they collect data on the deer they harvest. They turn that data over to us, so we get a picture of what's happening all over the state, and then we provide them a report and recommendations for their specific deer herd on their property. You need to harvest more does. You need to harvest this many does. Give them strict numbers and help them reach their buck management goals within that. And it has been a great partnership. We still have about 1 million acres that we're working with across the state, and just a great thing. That data has guided our decisions for decades now.
Yeah, no, and I left Mississippi in 2010, and it probably was shortly after I left there, even though I think I went to Kentucky and then I ended up in Missouri. But I quickly realized that Mississippi had been doing deer management well ahead of the curve of every other state. And this was coming from a Northeast guy, right? It was coming from Pennsylvania, which, we had our own struggles. But even thinking about Missouri and Iowa and Kansas and all these things, like what Mississippi was doing from a deer herd standpoint, how they were managing, even I guess the mentality of the hunters, William, in terms of how people were thinking about harvesting of does and passing bucks. I think we mentioned it maybe the last podcast that we were on with Mick Doggett is the WMU or WMAs that I was hunting down there had spread and main beam restrictions, which, I was coming from a state that guys couldn't even count 3 points on a side. So there were so many advancements that were happening in this state that it was weird to come down here and be like, wait a minute, like these guys are like really managing ahead of the curve, and, is not a state that comes off the tongue early for most people when you think about like quality deer hunting, I guess.
But yet we've got a lot of older age class bucks. We are harvesting some very, very nice bucks across the state, antler wise, and we've got some healthy herds. We're currently sitting at, our numbers are showing a record high deer population. And we're trying to address that right now, because that is too many deer are a good thing, but they cause a lot of problems. And from farming aspect to cities with a lot of complaints, we're now number 5 in the nation on deer vehicle collisions. But within that lot of deer, they're so important to our state. We're a rural state, and, a little less than 3 million people, and we're harvesting about 300,000 deer a year. And once again, with a record high deer population, we have very liberal bag limits, very liberal season length. You can hunt well over 1/3 of the year is open to deer hunting in Mississippi. So important part of our culture here. Just right now got maybe a little too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
Trying to encourage hunters to take a few more deer this year.
Yeah. What do you think is like the just in our brief conversation here, it sounds like the hunters of Mississippi, like, and I assume it's driven by the residents. It just seems like there is a foundation of like a management mindset that we just don't. It doesn't seem like we encounter a whole lot. Like, what do you think that is rooted in?
DMAP.
Mm-hmm.
I think DMAP was the spawn of that, and it created that relationship where hunters out there knew their biologist by first name.
Yeah.
And they started talking, and then they started talking to other properties, and they talked to other properties, and they began to see that it worked. They saw that taking deer off the landscape when they had too many, the deer remaining got bigger. They saw that passing on a buck, he actually really did get bigger. That wasn't just in the fiction there. So these deer began to get older and thus have larger antlers. And now you can go to a 40-acre block down here and people are passing legal deer voluntarily. They'll see, a lot of the state has a 10-inch spread or 13-inch main beam rule. And our best soil in the state, our Delta region, has a 12-inch spread or 15-inch main beam rule. And very few people now in a lot of those parts will even shoot a state legal deer. They're going to let it get another year or two older. And by the way, both of those were designed based on our DMAP data to protect 1-year-old bucks and allow 2-year-olds for harvest. Remember that category I told you how many 3-year-olds?
Yeah.
A lot of people are passing legal deer by choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your thinking is that DMAP, when was that started in Mississippi?
In 1981.
81. And so what, if I can backtrack that, your thought process is that DMAP, while it was intended to get people to, shoot does, basically, it got people communicating, and that's what spurred a conversation about, hey, maybe passing some of these deer.
It did. And hunters talk. I mean, we're talking. We're all hunters here. I'm a very avid hunter. Venison's a meat on my table. I'm going to talk to my neighbor down here about what's working.
Yeah.
And back then it was more word of mouth or magazines, but it began to show up as, hey, this stuff's working. I talked to a biologist. He helped me get my property online, and things are looking better now. And we're having better success at hunting and managing. And hey, this managing deer thing, it was a foreign topic then.
Yeah.
You're going to manage a deer herd. What does that mean? Once people learned, they began to share that info, and it's really caught on. I would say that definitely was the reason that we have the deer herd we have now.
Yeah, I think a big thing, like, again, kind of firsthand experience of it is, when I left Pennsylvania, I knew the deer biologist here at the Pennsylvania Game Commission, but very, very out of reach, right? Like, I mean, maybe I got an email from him when I was at Penn State in school, but, other than that, like my family who were, 20 or 25 hunters never had talked to him, never had seen, any of the deer biologists from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. When I went down there, like when we would go to, different QDMA meetings, or we would have the Magnolia buck scoring sessions and stuff, like all of the general hunters knew, William or Chad or Chris, any of these guys, they knew them by name. And, they knew that they were like, hey, remember this deer? And these guys, they had kind of, I want to say almost like you guys had intimate knowledge with some of these local landowners that you had been working with, firsthand.
That's right. And it's led to, like I said earlier, hunting and deer hunting is such a huge culture down here now. And it's so much, it's a huge driver of our economy. I mean, everybody's out there. It looks like everybody's out there hunting. This weekend, I'm riding down the road and there are vehicles, you can tell they're hunters headed up. They're going, continually. And once again, our rut's about to kick in. It's already kicked in Northwest, but now I want to back up a minute. That relationship with our hunters and what's happening now has not been built just because of DMAP. It's also been built by the research that's ongoing at Mississippi State and with the Mississippi State Extension Service, like Dr. Bronson Strickland. By making and putting all that together and having this relationship that we have with that university, and we're able to get the information. So I'll back up, Jeremy. You were a grad student at State, and so was I. I came along several years before you. Our agency does not have a research division.
Yep.
Mississippi State is our wildlife research division.
Right.
So we take money and we fund the university to hire graduate students to research topics that we, after talking with hunters and looking at deer data, realize we need to know the answer to. So we turn around, fund that project, often sit in on the interview board. So when graduate students come in, we sit there with the professors and interview that student to hire them as you came in. And then you go out as a student to help figure out the answer that we're needing so we can take that answer and apply it in the field.
Yep.
So if people were wondering, that process has worked wonderfully through the years. Now you've got a landowner who says, well, I heard something from the state agency, but that's the state agency. I'm going to reach out to the university. What do they think? And they tell them the same thing.
Yeah.
Because we work together to find the answer. And now suddenly they're hearing it from Extension, they're hearing it from MSU, and they're hearing it from their state agency, and they begin to implement it, and it's working. So we've had countless projects through the years, including mine. I came along back when trail cameras were using D batteries, y'all. And
I remember that.
Oh yeah.
You actually put film in the camera. If you put that film in just right, you could get 39 exposures on a roll of film. I figured that out. And so
the HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Muddy and Stealth Cam trail cameras.
Cell cams. What an evolution the industry has seen, and we've experienced personally over the past 5, 10, whenever cameras were invented, right? It's like, man, it's totally changed the way that we inventory deer, pattern deer, and ultimately the decisions that we make when we're going out to hunt. They're a serious piece of the puzzle, and that information is invaluable for us. We trust the Muddy and Stealth cams, together to be able to collect any of that information.
Yeah, I mean, as an admitted trail cam addict, I've definitely been guilty of underhunting places or relying too heavily on that information that's come in. That said, it's an invaluable tool to the overall management plan and strategy that I have for my own properties or even hunting public land. It doesn't matter. We have a finite amount of time in going out and hunting. So when you and I are after a particular class or quality of deer, usually a mature buck, we can't waste time hunting an area where that deer doesn't exist. And those cell cams provide that information that allow us to spend the time in the area with the highest chance to accomplish our goals.
Say it all the time, man. They can't kill them if they're not there.
That's it.
So right now, any of our listeners can use code HUNTR20 to get 20% off either Muddy or Stealth cameras. We're certainly going to be taking advantage of that, and we hope you guys do too.
Yep, check out Stealth Cam and Muddy. That's it, man. I have my first trail camera I ever owned was a film camera, and I put it out on Black Prairie WMA because I had drawn out there, and I remember, in fact, I think I missed the buck and rifle season out there, but it was the first place that I ever put it. But William, you talk about like the research and kind of the back and forth, and I know I've got a couple landowners that I still talk to pretty frequently in Mississippi. And, one of the things that Damaris and Strickland had worked on is this concept around selective harvest, right? Which is essentially, if we're looking at the age class of bucks and we're looking at the scores of bucks, taking out, calling, the lower third of those age classes, like what that could potentially do. And we talk about it in a lot of states, like we don't have enough buck tags to do that, right? Like it's impossible. We either get one buck tag, in some states we get two. The way that you guys have it structured from a liberalization side, like some of these landowners can implement some of these, basically culling techniques to remove some of those lower quality, higher age class type deer without affecting their ability to kill a trophy.
Correct. We will give them within the DMAP program, if the biologist deems the need based on their objectives and goals, we will give them management buck tags that don't count toward their limit to remove those deer from those specific properties. That's once again, they turn the data into us. We're looking at trail camera photos with that club. They're showing us these deer. We're saying yes. And granted, guys, I mean, we've got a lot of deer. We've got a really high deer population. So believe it or not, we got properties that need to kill more bucks. So we're telling properties, hey, you've got to take more not just does. You're doing a good job on does, but we actually need to take a few more bucks off of some of these properties, and we give them the tags to do that.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a big piece, because what's interesting, and you know, maybe we'll try to educate some of the listeners here a little bit, William, on the way that Mississippi lays out is, you know, Mississippi has very distinct soil types across the state. You know, and that's why when we talked about just briefly, like, you know, hey, these coastal deer that are usually small, can we get them to look like the Delta deer? There's a very diverse layout across the state in these different kind of groups of deer that you have. You guys, although you're looking at it, just like you said, hey, 10 and 13 in most of the state, 12 and 15 in the Delta, the fact that you have the knowledge and the touch points at these club level type relations is really how deer need to be managed, right? Like there is this state level discussion that we're having, and it's the broad-based regulations and things like that, but most states just don't take the next step, which is that local micro level management to, like you said, because of DMAP and the way this is set up, to be able to say, hey guys, you're showing me these pictures, like these bucks, yeah, you need to kill them. Like let's get you some management tags as part of DMAP. Let's get the data on them. Let's see how old they are.
So here, just talk to me like I'm an idiot. How does DMAP work? How would you go about, what is the basis for it? Like if I'm a landowner and I want to, you know, why would I want to apply for DMAP, and how would I get approval for it?
I'll start you on the process. You are a landowner. You say, hey, I'm thinking about contacting and signing up for DMAP. Let me learn about it. You can go to our website and request a site visit from one of our private land biologists. That's free, by the way. And you sign up, and they schedule a time to meet you on your property and ride around your property, usually on an ATV. We get out a bit, we walk a bit, and we cannot look at that property, Jared, and tell you, okay, you've got 112 deer.
Right.
But we can look at key indicator plants and tell you if they should be eating those plants or not. And say, okay, it's appearing you've got too many deer, or hey, you're doing a pretty good job of managing it. So we've got those key indicator plants that we're looking at in the native habitat. Now, we got two levels of DMAP. We started the most recent level just a few years ago. It's just kicking off. There's no acreage requirement, and we ask hunters to draw off their property online on our web system. They draw it off, and then the biologist will make that site visit, and they are eligible for additional doe tags. If the biologist needs it at the end of the year, they turn in the total harvest from that property. So we have all these little dots across the state that this 25 acres harvested 11 deer, and this 200 acres harvested 1 deer all across. So, but the bread and butter DMAP has been, we required properties to either be 1,000 acres or be harvesting 10 does annually. So if you qualify for the traditional level of DMAP, and the reason for that, we need a big enough data set to justify writing the report and it to have meaning. You can't make much of a sample size on 2 does.
Right.
You just can't. So you're not looking at enough data unless you have years of harvesting 2 does. So you sign up. Once again, biologist comes. Now you're in DMAP. Once again, there's no cost for that. Within that, you go out and you harvest a deer.
And there's a number, right? They'll start you off with how, based on your number of deer you are shooting now or the amount of acreage, you'll say, all right, here's 5 additional doe tags.
We don't start off with doe tags and buck tags.
Okay.
We start off with a year of collecting data based on kind of what you've already been doing, so that we can then see what you need based on your data. We never get buck tags the first
kind
year.
of data collection process. Is that like trail cam surveys and stuff?
That data collection starts with harvesting a deer, taking it back, recording live or dressed weight, lactation data, antler measurements, checking hooves for sloughing if we've had a hemorrhagic disease outbreak, and turning in that data by a timeline at the end of the year. We also ask hunters, a lot of them we will get to collect observation data while they're in their stands. We work with camera surveys on some, but we're simply time constrained. We cannot analyze camera surveys for hunting clubs.
Are they still all pulling jawbones, William?
Yes, they're pulling jawbones. The jawbone is saved and tagged, and all this data is written on a data sheet. At the end of deer season, they turn all this data to us. We age the jawbones for them. We enter that data, and then we create a report specific to them. Hey, you harvested 10 does, and your body weights are well below average for your soil region. You mentioned that, Jeremy. We look at it based on the soil physiographic region and the county. And we then provide them a report of, hey, we did a browse. We came out, your browse was hit hard. You took about 10 does. You said you shot, 9 last year. We're going to have to up this considerably. And now you're showing me pictures of deer that are clearly adult deer with subpar antlers. Okay, well, that's because you got too many deer. So we take it step by step. They may not get those buck tags till they've been in for a few years of collecting data, and they've started to write some of the problems with overpopulation. When we get overpopulation under control, and then we've got that herd healthy, then we start looking at, okay, you're still going to get some bucks that are maturing at less than what the club's goals are. Now do we start implementing some more management type bucks, but we work on the health of that herd first, get it healthy, then we start working on management or cull bucks after that.
William, are you guys still doing the annual report that you guys used to put out for the deer program?
To some degree, yes. We haven't published it in a couple of years, but we're still putting that data together, Jeremy. And we still have our statewide DMAP report and it divided by soil physiographic region. So pulling that data together, and once again, so much of what we do is driven by that data analysis.
Is that just available on the website for people once you guys compile all that?
It is.
I'll tell you what, it's they used to put out it was a booklet. It was a report on basically all the DMAP data by soil region. Like if you were, and again, back then it wasn't as big of a rush, but if you're looking to buy land or anything, you could open that thing up to a specific region. You could look what the average body weights were. You could look at what the average age was, what the basal circumferences were. I mean, there's everything that you could want was like an open book of data for the year for all of Mississippi.
And I do say we hadn't published it in a couple of years, but it is available upon request.
Okay.
Hope to be publishing it again soon.
I loved it, man. It was it was good coffee table material, to be honest, because there's just, it was probably 40, 50 pages of just packed full of everything.
How many states would you say now are utilizing some sort of a DMAP program?
I mean, most of the South is at this point.
Or do any stand out that you'd say are being highly successful, like it sounds like Mississippi is?
Oh, yes. Virginia, Arkansas, and I would leave out several if I sat here and tried to name them all. But those two just come to mind because I know they're people, quite personally, good friends with them in their deer programs. And they're doing great jobs on DMAP, as are many other states out there.
It's widely utilized, right? Like more are using it than are not.
The South, because it was foundationally built or developed in the South, most of the southern states have adapted it, partially because there's, good deer populations, fairly liberal bag limits, lower hunter numbers. So your hunters have to have the ability to kill more deer, basically. As you get, I think, more towards the hunter-dense states, like Pennsylvania's got a really good DMAP program in place. And obviously, we're a very high-density hunter state. A lot of our state forests are in DMAP programs to where you could get additional tags to your regional tags. The data reporting, I think, is where probably, William, the line is the most kind of fuzzy. In that, you've got states like Mississippi and what William and those guys are doing of the amount of data they're collecting is just
that relationship with Mississippi State is I'm
huge,
envious, frankly. So I would say Ohio is like closest to our heart, just because that's, it's what we know the most. We've talked to several of their state representatives. As far as I know, there's not a whole lot of collaboration with. I mean, it would be Ohio State.
It would actually be Ohio University, which is in Athens.
Okay. It sounds like most of their data collected is through surveying, which
correct.
Even admittedly, we talked to Mike Tonkovich is their deer program director, and he's like, yeah, here's how we pull the data, and it's fairly limited sample size and stuff. And it's like, so I don't know, as my mind's kind of reeling around that. And also we don't have DMAP in Ohio. And so like, I'm trying to piece together why. I guess it brings me back to like, I'm curious if you guys ever utilize is there a social element to like studies that you can request from Mississippi State? Like certainly it's one thing to understand how to do a healthy deer herd and how do we harvest them and stuff like that. Do you guys have any like questions or considerations? Do you work with the university on like, hey, how do these technologies, for instance, or different weapons being used in different how does it affect the social dynamic and how do people respond to those?
We've done several surveys through Extension, through the Deer Lab, and through our own agency on some of these. When we've leaned more toward internet surveys lately because they're so much cheaper, so much quicker. But we also realize that in a rural state, we're not catching a full scope of the hunters out there. Some are simply not going to go on and log on to a survey and take that survey. So, but yes, we do it to the social aspect, but we're also hearing from hunters a lot. We have open forum web questions they can ask. We have a biologist of the day help desk they can call. So we're hearing from hunters across our state a lot.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you kind of see, even from like the hunters of Mississippi, like, well, it was the first place I was introduced to deer cooperatives. Like I had never heard the term even deer cooperative before I went to Mississippi. And like, here's, 10, 15, 20 landowners all sharing data, all sharing, transparently, what they're killing, what their goals are and stuff, and creating thousands of acres of essentially contiguous ground at that point. And that was completely foreign to me, and those guys, just like anything, you bring humans into it, you've got different dynamics and people agree, people disagree. But like those were some of the first times that it was like these guys basically were willing to say, listen, we want to get stuff done. The only way we're going to do it is if we're all on the same page. And they did. They adapted.
So a few years ago, a project we were really wanting to look at was mature buck movement. And we went to an area northwest of our capital city, a high deer density area along one of our major river systems. Deer management is very, very strong in this area. And we began to talk to landowners, and we hired a graduate student, a grad student. We funded the project. MSU hired the student. It turned into multiple students. And that project was 75,000 contiguous acres and over 45 landowners that all agreed to work together to allow these deer to be collared on their property, caught and collared, and put them off limits for harvest. And anytime one died, we would go back in and take that collar and catch another deer during that 3-year window and put it on. And so we were able to get that many people to work together. And by the way, only two of those deer were harvested during the study.
Wow.
So and many of these deer were scoring in the 150s or better on this area. So they were really nice bucks. We collared a few 2-year-olds, but most of them were 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-old bucks that we had collars on. And these people would report when they saw them. We were taking, they were GPS collars, and we were taking readings every 15 minutes from September through February. Our season runs October through January, so we gave a month buffer. And we were watching what these deer did on this area. How far do they go? How much movement? How much daytime movement? How do they use feeders? Some of the properties fed, some did not. How do they use food plots? How do they stick to cover? Did they use the upland? Did they use the ag? Did they use the bottomland? And it uncovered so much of what these mature bucks were doing. In a nutshell, they move a lot more than we thought they did in daylight.
Yeah.
A whole lot more. But they moved in thick cover. They stayed in the thickets. Then when they moved, they also, those adult bucks avoided those feeders on those properties pretty strongly. They showed a pretty strong avoidance during daylight hours. They would show up at them later at night and use them from like 11 to 3 in the morning, but they would avoid them more during the day. And quite often in an ag setting there, they would go miles out of their way to stay in cover versus crossing an open ag field. Wow. Even though it was just a few hundred yards of crossing. So uncovered a lot, but back on the people, they were excited about that project and happy to participate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Who wouldn't be? How many times have you thought? I mean,
we've talked about it.
I have to think after that study that probably the people that participated in it probably benefit from their ability to now hunt their property like so much.
Yeah. Imagine, it lifted up the rock to say, hey, here's what they're doing
on your property. You're like, and you know, either I never would have guessed it or
I think it's well, we've talked about that in a lot of places.
That study just came out a couple of years ago, right?
Well, you see the MSU Deer Lab and Strickland like posting on social. They'll say, "Hey, do you see this buck? He crossed this river. He did his bedding areas were here, 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 and here." Like that. That's where all of those points are coming from. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by RackHub.
Well, dude, sheds are starting to hit the ground.
Yeah, and although we usually don't find many of them, we've done pretty well this season so far.
I would say for just a handful of walks, we've got a pile of sheds to show for it. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, if shed season would end today, I think it was pretty successful.
So this year we're partnering with RackHub. It's an antler mounting system for your sheds.
Yeah, and obviously people have watched our podcast. We've got this massive pile of sheds that are on the table at all times, but you guys took the time to set up Wide Boy's shed on the R1, which is a really cool way to now have that thing right off to my left-hand side during the podcast.
So some of these sheds just call for a little bit more appreciation, I guess. So rather than being on a pile on the table, we're going to mount them on the wall, and they look awesome. So
yeah, and so if anybody wants to try RackHub, you can use the code HUNTR10, HUNTR10 at RackHub.com to get 10% off your order.
Use RackHub to make the most of your shed season. What were some other key takeaways from that? Maybe my mind goes to home range. I know you talked about shifting a few hundred yards and stuff, and
so a little over half of the deer were termed sedentary. They had pretty well a one home range that they lived in all year. Now within that home range, roughly 1,000 acres. They did not live over the whole 1,000 acres all year. They shifted within parts of it. Even during season, they were shifting quite a bit. Like during the early season in bachelor groups, they would then shift as they began to break up, and they would shift to a different few hundred acres. And where they were early in our deer season was not where they were using later in our deer season. We also found that about 30 to 40% of those deer they were very mobile home range deer. They had a summer range and they had a winter range. And at some point, usually around August, September, those bucks would leave their summer range and go to their winter range. And the most extreme of that was 14 miles. He would live in a couple of hundred acres. Then pretty well to the same day in late summer, he would leave and he would go 14 miles away to live on a couple of hundred acres down there. And so people were getting pictures of this deer. He was a nice buck. I mean, he was a 140 class deer, and people would see him, but he's literally 14 miles away.
That's so crazy.
And he would take a route that he would walk about 30 miles to go that 14 miles. And I don't know why he did that, but he did, and he would follow the same route. And then about the same time in spring, he would leave and go back. We had another that was near the Mississippi River, and that deer would swim across to Louisiana routinely. We documented 4 trips, and he would leave within less than a handful of days apart. And hey, there was ag and hardwood on both sides.
Sure.
Everything looked to us to be the same, but he would go 36 miles. He would go down the river, make a circle, come back up, go way north, jump in the river, and land on the other side, then go and live on a block in Louisiana during the summer. Then within one of his trips was within 1 day on the calendar of the same day. The other was within 4 days. He would come back and go down, and he would follow that same route and go live and go right back to where we caught him at during deer season.
Nuts.
So you got pictures of that deer, Jeremy, and you're watching him, and you've got pictures of him all summer, and we're finding that some of them may be in the next county.
I mean, that's what's so crazy about it. Like, we start thinking about that, if you're hunting a 100 or 200 or 300 acre piece of ground, and that deer disappears, and you're like, okay, like, is he at the neighbor property? Is he here? Like, those deer literally could be going like 10, 15, 20, 30 miles away. And it's like, beyond having that data, I don't think anybody can fathom that those deer are literally, because I mean, to me, when that deer disappears, like, I've got some right now in Ohio that I'm like, is he at the neighbors? The neighbor said he's not. I mean, I write him off. I'm like, that deer's dead, right? Because nobody around me is seeing him. I'm like, he's got to be dead. What if he picked up and moved 5 miles?
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder about, like, in the deer's brain, like, what is their perception of the world? You know what I mean? Like, in terms of, like, size, it's like we could say, well, they only know because they can't perceive, right, outside of a range that they've been in. It's not like they know that, hey, there could be a bean field over there a few miles.
Probably not.
Unless they've been there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the next link in this, and right now, the fact that a deer starts off small and grows bigger is the limitation on this. But is that where they dispersed from as a yearling?
Yeah, very possible. Yeah.
So, we know yearling dispersal is a pretty long distance in some cases and varies by habitat. Could that deer have been born in one spot and be going back to near where it was born and live for, 12 to 16 months? And then it just has a different range, and it goes back and forth from old home to new home.
Yeah.
We don't have those studies long enough. We're still looking at, you can't put a collar on a fawn and expect it to stay on him till he's a 3-year-old deer, because the deer's going to grow too much. So, but I think we will uncover that in the near future.
Well, they
act like they know where they're going, because they're going too specific a route and passing.
Yeah.
Like, one was going through the parking lot of a gas station when he would go through, and he would pass back within the border of that security light when he would go make his travels. I mean, it was too specific.
Well, I mean, if you think about, like, throw it onto the fish side, like, you think about some of the salmon and steelhead breeding of, like, these, where they go up and breed into these creeks and tributaries, and then they go back out into the ocean. They've never been there really since, and they find their way and go right back to the same spot and do it all over again as they become adult fish. So, like, whether that's some inherited, programming that's going on.
I wonder, like, fawn dispersal seems like the most likely culprit of that. I wonder how many times post that dispersal they're making new journeys, like to new areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we documented these. All of those deer took at least one excursion. Those mature bucks, those 3-year-old and older bucks. It was 55 of them, I think, was our target goal, and it would vary. One died of blue tongue, one got hit by a car, and then we would come back. But overall, every single one of them during the hunting season here, which overlapped our rut entirely, during the rut would take an excursion. And the most, I think, one took 12 excursions. And these excursions were miles. They would go off chasing a girl and wind up somewhere a few miles away, and then stay gone 2 or 3 days and then come right back home. And that is that deer that you're sitting there and you're like, where did this come from? I've been running cameras for the past 6 months. I've never seen this deer. He's just suddenly shown up on my property, and you never see him again. because those excursions were not to the same location. He would go to the northeast and wind up on this property. The next time he may go north and wind up somewhere. Or so he was just going off roaming for a bit, and then he would come home if he didn't get harvested.
I mean, you have to imagine, like, you know, I think in some cases it's hard for us to think about that in the Northeast or the Midwest. Like, are those deer doing that thing? Why wouldn't they? I mean, they're deer. Like, if they're doing it in Mississippi, they're probably doing it everywhere else too.
Well, there's certainly a shift. Like, there's a shift happening probably throughout the season. Like, if you can go back and you have enough trail cameras on enough acreage, you know, you're going to see certain deer moving into a property a certain time with some, you know, some degree of like consistency. But what we don't hardly ever see is surprise bucks. You know, like after, you know, we've been running cameras on a property for, I don't know, two or three or more years. You know, I was telling you about my Ohio property earlier. I can't remember the last time that I saw or got a picture of or saw in person a deer that I didn't recognize. So, and that's what makes me question, like, whether or not those I mean, it's possible they come and they go and I never see them, but it's like, man, I feel like there's enough guys hunting the property. I'm running enough trail cameras that
you'd think so.
I'm getting pictures of pretty much, you know, and over years and years and years and years, eventually you're going to get a picture of one of those randoms. And it just has happened so infrequently that I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's happening as much up here, but who knows?
Yeah. No studies.
Age structure related, maybe.
Very
We've got
possible.
A lot more older bucks in the population than what you mentioned you were hunting there. So you get in an area that's got a lot of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old bucks.
Yeah.
And
very well might do it.
I think that's a huge part of it, because if you think about the level of intensity as you get into the rut, when you've got those deer that are that 3 to 7-year-old and you pack a bunch of them into an area, that doesn't work. You're loading dynamite into a small tight area, right? Like, eventually it's going to blow, and some of these deer are going to end up finding their way on the outside of that kind of core home range.
It just blows my mind to go back to your stat at the beginning that, you know, almost 80% of your deer are 3 years old or older.
Bucks.
Of the bucks. Yeah. I'm just like, it just isn't happening like anywhere else. You know what I mean? Jeremy and I are hunting a lot of places, like, you know, in the Northeast and even in the Midwest. And it's like, dude, guys are cracking 3 and 3-year-olds, you know, a lot.
2-year-olds.
And 2-year-olds. And it's like, and my mind is reeling to try to, like, in the DMAP thing is interesting. You know, I don't know if that's something like you impose, you know, at this point in 2024 in one of these Northeast or Midwestern states, and if that generates the communication that you would hope would happen. It almost seems like, you know, that it seems like that bell curve of like the interest in managing for bigger deer has, where we're at, it almost seems like it's come and we're on the back side of it, to where the demand has exceeded the supply so much that the willingness to hold out on deer is evaporating.
So I was going to ask that, William, just thinking about Mississippi and talking about, you know, having higher deer densities. Like right now, there's just a lot of those deer that are 3 and older, right, that exist in the state of Mississippi. I would assume at some point, though, you know, guys were smacking before antler restrictions. Were smacking a bunch of 1 and 2-year-olds. Like that, they, you know,
absolutely, yes,
yeah, they were shooting them.
So if you back up to the mid 90s on one of our largest wildlife management areas, 58,000 acres in the Delta, Sunflower Wildlife Management Area.
Yep.
We've done herd health evaluations where we take does in the spring off of areas now since the 1980s. We will take them off certain areas that either our land or that we manage, or on private lands that cooperate with us and want this to happen. We don't ever force our way in to do this, but we will take a sample of does and we will then determine when those does are bred. And we're doing this when the fetuses are going to be big enough to measure, and we're going to be able to backdate that and looking at those fetal aging charts. Well, that particular area, 1-year-old buck harvest was so high back in the early 90s, they could not find a bred doe all the way out to May.
Holy cow.
None. literally hunters were taking every antlered buck, practically everyone off the property every year off of 58,000 acres. And that opened our eyes to, okay, something's got to be done.
Right.
And this was before me, a few years before I started. And so they implemented a 3-point on a side rule.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you can imagine, if there were nothing left out there but a few buck fawns that year, nothing met the criteria the next year.
Right. Yeah.
So there were no bucks harvested the following year, and it stayed low for a few years. And we implemented increased doe harvest on that property.
Mm-hmm.
And many people thought we were ruining it, but you look back on it now, and it's one of our areas that now to harvest a buck on there, he's got to have a 15-inch spread or 18-inch main beams. And he is it's producing a lot of really nice deer off of that area.
Mm-hmm.
But we realized we were over harvesting drastically. It was shortly after that the 4-point law came into effect in Mississippi. That was a statewide regulation.
I remember that.
And we were able to, people at first hesitant, resistant. It was new. It was change. Within a year or two, wow, I'm seeing the biggest deer I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Because 1-year-olds were making it to 2-year-old.
Yep.
And I think from that, then DMAP kicked in and helped them manage toward, many clubs would say, okay, the state law is 10-13. We want to manage our club for 12-15.
Yep.
So the biologist would help them manage for 1-year older deer and help them, get that herd right and healthy again. And then suddenly all the club members had harvested a deer or two like that after a few years, and they wanted to move up again. And it's just naturally progressed up. So then you have those smaller landowners that were joining the bigger clubs that were managing it begin to benefit. And they're like, why would I shoot a small deer when I do have bigger deer coming?
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing them on camera. I'm seeing them when I'm hunting. And the bottom line is the management spread.
Yeah.
And it's, we got that many mature bucks, but several of those mature bucks do not have great antlers.
Right.
So it's still, any antler criteria we implement will have some level of high grading.
Yeah. Well,
So
I was going to say
even
that was the big one around the 4-point rule. Like it did what it was supposed to do, but then the research came out and it was like, boy, we're really high grading our older age class deer by having this 4-point rule in place.
That's right. Thus, we took that data from DMAP again, working with Mississippi State again to help analyze the data, and then implemented the spread main beam rule that we've had since we did away with 4-point rule in that would have been 2006, I think.
Which is a huge move, William. Like, I mean, again, I'm looking at coming from a state, we've had the number of point restriction in Pennsylvania since 2002, I think. So 22 years, and we can't get away from it. For sure, we're high grading our older age class deer. What amazes me is like what you guys have been able to do to say, okay, we accomplished a goal with the 4-point rule. We've looked at the data. Wait a minute, we're high grading the older age class, so we need to fix that. And then you use the DMAP data to go to a 10, 13, or 12, 15. Like, it just doesn't seem like most states would even think about making that.
It's blowing my mind, honestly.
Like, it's a huge move because even as guys who like hunt a lot, it's not easy to estimate a 12 or 15 necessarily.
No, it's not. But hunters have done a great job of doing it. And now, granted, some of our WMAs, all of a sudden we had a lot of exactly 12-inch deer killed that first year. That if that hunter was coming to a self-serve permit station, I realized it's 11 and a half. Am I going to write down 11 and a half or am I going to write down 12? And it was self-serve stations. And but over time, even with that, things started changing. People saw the impact and they started voluntarily passing legal deer that barely met the criteria. So they're like, hey, I literally have the chance of a bigger deer coming along any minute. So I'm going to pass that deer that's borderline. And that having a whole lot of deer helped with that as well. So
wow. Hard to fathom. Like, and that's why I said, like, and I've said it multiple podcasts, like the deer management mind of not just you guys at MWF&P, but obviously Mississippi State, but even the hunter in Mississippi seems miles ahead of so many other states. Like it's hard to fathom. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this because we've got a big contingency in the Midwest and the Northeast that are just like, how did this state get so far ahead of the curve here?
There's almost like an unwillingness to, like, from time to time, I skim the comments on our YouTube videos and stuff. Anytime we talk about, wanting to manage for an older age class, bigger antlers of deer, not that we would tell anybody how to hunt them or what to shoot or whatever. It's just in the interest of having a healthy deer herd and for all hunters to be able to, harvest any class of deer that they're after. And there just seems to be a strong distaste anymore or a resistance to be like, to anything like that. And it's like, I guess it's giving us some hope to hear that, there are people in certain states that are like, have that interest. And I don't think it's like that it's not there. I just think that it's like, if people don't believe that it can happen, it's a similar kind of phenomenon to like where if people do see, if 1 year passes and maybe there was some resistance, but then, hey, I see a bigger deer, we can all look around and be like, oh, okay, hey, maybe that can work. It happens just as easily the other way. And it seems like we can so quickly forget to where it's like, well, my neighbor shot that buck. So like, clearly, it's not, I'm not going to pass this one because that can't happen. And then we just very quickly reach a point of where we're like, well, we're just not doing this.
Well, William, I was going to ask what, in a lot of the other parts of the country, we're dealing with significant access issues. What's access for hunters look like in Mississippi right now? Like, is it starting to become an issue? Does it seem like everything's under control and people have ample opportunities? What's your gut feeling there?
So that's a mixed answer. We do have a lot of private lands, and access on those is restricted. And they bring in their friends, guests, whoever they so choose to hunt. And on some of those areas that are larger scale private land holdings is where we're getting a lot of deer overpopulation issues,
right? Because
they're not harvesting enough deer. But others of those are doing a wonderful job of managing, and I guess that would be across the board. Now, public land, we've got well over 1 million acres of public land in the state that is accessible, that some of it's state legal, some of it is restricted to primitive weapons, some of it is restricted to draw hunt only, you apply in August, some of it is restricted to only a short window of time for gun opportunity and has more archery opportunity. And some have state legal antler requirements. Some have trophy level antler requirements. Basically, we tried to lay that out even within our WMA system, that if someone wants a chance to harvest a state, I just want to go out and have a chance at a legal deer. Here's your opportunity. I want to go somewhere that I have a chance of seeing some bucks and maybe harvesting a really nice buck. Well, here is that opportunity, but you've got to get put in and get drawn, and you only get drawn, once every several years to have that opportunity. So it literally varies across. There's always somewhere relatively close that you could wake up in this state and go hunting during deer season if you chose to, though.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say is like are you guys still doing the WMA permit as well? For use?
We are. $115 permit allows you to hunt 52 wildlife management areas.
And the non-consumptive people still are buying that too, right? For use on it?
That is correct.
That's a huge piece.
So anyone who uses the WMA, the state-owned WMAs, anyone who uses it has to buy that permit.
$15.
So $15.
But I will say, and again, this is coming from a Northeast guy.
I think we're moving to Mississippi.
Well, when I was hunting when I was in Starkville and I was hunting some of the WMAs around there, I'd be walking out and I'm like, this is a 5-acre food plot, or this is a 2-acre food plot, or I'm like, what? Like, this is state land. Like the funds and the money and the effort to managing those lands are visible, right? Like you could see what they're doing with that stuff. And I think a lot of it is because of those permits and things.
we're gaining. Those dollars go straight back into our WMAs, and some of our state-owned WMAs. We're also doing timber sales. We've been buying a lot more land recently. We've had that opportunity in buying state lands to add to we're constantly looking for land adjacent to existing wildlife management areas to expand those. So we've had several purchases recently, and our program is, well, we got a lot of hunters, and granted, as a percent of our population, we have a relatively high number of hunters. As a total number of hunters, we're going to be less than Pennsylvania. I mean, we're less than 3 million total people in the state, but a lot of those 3 million hunt.
Well, so William, so even still, like, let's use a round number. Let's say you do have 300,000 total hunters, which is not a lot as compared to Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, a lot of these states. And maybe this is, so give us as much as you want to give here, but, trying to understand, a lot of these states are like, well, we can't lose hunters because of funding. And so every license sale matters. We understand that. But clearly, Mississippi doesn't have as many hunters total, right? The proportion to the population is high, but yet you guys are still well funded. You're using your resources, your natural resources, effectively to continue to expand programs and manage land. Obviously, that WMA permit is a big thing. I guess I'm just trying to nail down, based on some of our discussions with these other states. It's like they seem like they're really struggling to do anything to try to make the deer herd better, because their fear of losing 100 hunters is like, it's a nightmare.
That's what it seems like. That's what restricts a lot of these good management decisions from being made, is fear of losing hunters.
Well, we didn't lose hunters when we did it. And I'm not going to speak on what any other state is doing. I'll simply speak on us, but we didn't lose hunters. Our numbers, I was actually looking at our hunter numbers, and we've been holding relatively steady to slightly increase. We're bucking national trends on our total number of hunters. So I'm happy with that. We're staying consistent, and we just need those individual hunters for the next year or two to add another deer into their harvest. And because we got to get this overall population under control.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, William, I can't remember what it was when I was there, but I mean, like, the resident hunting license is not that expensive in the state of Mississippi.
Sportsman's license, which encompasses hunting, fishing, big game, small game, and archery, primitive weapon, all of that inclusive, is $45.
Yeah.
What is the dynamic of non-hunters or non-resident hunters coming to the state versus residents?
So we get a lot of non-resident hunters. Their license is quite a bit more expensive, as is in most states for non-resident hunters. But we get a fair number, mostly from our border states.
I was going to say Alabama, Louisiana, I know was always a contingency there.
That's right. That's the two top. Well, I think Louisiana's the top number of coming into Mississippi to hunt. But our border states, they come across, and we enjoy having them.
Could you say, like, what percentage of the total number of hunters are made up by non-residents, or even if you could speak towards like license revenue, that would help us with some context.
License revenue is going to be close to the same as our resident hunters.
Okay.
But their license is more expensive. I'm trying to remember the percent off the top of my head.
Yeah, but that helps, William. And we say that because, Ohio, we continue to use an example just because those guys were very transparent with numbers, but 70% of the license revenue is from non-resident hunters in the state of Ohio.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So,
it's roughly the same in Mississippi, maybe slightly more from non-resident, but it's very close.
Yeah, which makes sense.
I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah, it makes sense knowing what the non-resident fee is versus, the cost effectiveness as a resident of $45.
Yeah, well, those numbers, I guess, are not that surprising either. Just based on the the hunter density of states that surround Ohio. You know what I mean? It makes sense that there's a lot of people flocking to it.
Yeah, and I know Mississippi, you mentioned Louisiana, a lot of Louisiana residents owning land in the state of Mississippi. Mississippi, well, the South in general, but with all of the paper companies and stuff like Weyerhaeuser, like those lands becoming lease lands or hunt clubs. Again, that was kind of some of my first experience with even leasing. Like that was a foreign word to me when I went down there, and you start to meet these clubs that are leasing timber ground and having their own hunt club, and or even the guy who's leasing a couple 100 acres. It was my first real experience when I went to Mississippi to engage in that.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Sever.
Well, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is what our arrow setups are. And this year we're shooting the Sever broadheads. I think we're both shooting the new 2-inch titanium broadhead. And so, we're huge proponents of expandables. And I know we've had this argument back and forth with people, but we're
right and you're wrong, and you just need to accept it.
We just want to have a giant wound that pumps out blood. That's the bottom line.
We build our arrow setups and shoot bows, to maximize penetration, and we shoot broadheads that are going to give us the best blood trails, the most hemorrhage possible. And so part of those setups is we're also shooting the Easton arrows here coming up pretty soon. So we've shot the Victory in the past, and there's all kind of great arrow shafts on the market, but we're looking for a whole system from broadhead to arrow components to the arrow shaft itself. And the more we look at some of these Easton shafts and the components that go with them, that setup's going to be really deadly for us.
Yeah, I'm actually using the Easton traditional axis right now in my traditional setups for both my recurve and my longbow. I've got a 100-grain brass insert on those, and then obviously I'm using a fixed blade broadhead on those specific shafts.
Right on.
So, but yeah, our goal is always to be shooting the best broadhead that we think is going to be the most lethal for our setups. We've done plenty of research. We believe in the Sever broadheads, and we hope you would check them out at Sever Broadheads as well.
One more thing on the non-resident stuff. The licenses are over the counter, correct?
Correct.
Except for some of those WMA or WMU areas you mentioned are draw. Is it the same for residents and non-residents, or are residents?
They may apply, yes, during the same time frame, and but yes, so they are welcome to join into the application process. Once again, chances of getting drawn on some of these are once every several years.
Yep. And is there preference given to residents on those over non-residents? Or is it
No, there's no preference points put toward that, either one.
Interesting.
The only thing on turkeys, because we are a state that opened so much earlier than most any other state with a March 15th turkey opener, we did have to restrict non-resident turkey hunters on public land to drawings, because we were the only game left in town, and we did this 2 years ago. And when we were the only game left, that had a large surge in non-resident hunters coming here because it opened only Florida opened sooner.
Yeah. And
we had a lot more available public land. So we had to put a cap on that. And we did that by putting in a draw hunt for non-resident hunters to hunt on public land for the first 2 weeks of our turkey season.
Yeah.
Just the first 2 weeks. But that allowed other states to open their season, and we were all playing on the same field then. So
that's interesting. We saw the Dakotas do something similar, where they wouldn't allow non-residents to hunt public lands until
October 1st. That was fun. He mentioned turkeys. My first year in college there, I remember it was, I got there in the summer, so hunted deer season. So it was really like my first spring there. And it was like, turkey season's opened in March. I'm used to it being end of April where I grew up. I remember calling my dad and I'm like, you're not going to believe this shit. They've got beard restrictions down here. And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, it's got to be an adult turkey or a 6-inch or longer beard. And he thought I was joking. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. Like, that's how serious these guys take their turkey hunting.
Wow.
And
good for you guys. It
was wild. Yeah.
And that is that rule has been in place now for decades.
Isn't that crazy?
And a legal bird, if he's got a full fan, if you see him strutting, he's got a full fan, he's legal. Or he's got to have a 6-inch or longer beard. Basically, it cut jakes out.
Yep.
And man, that is very much embraced. We will allow kids to shoot a jake, and very few kids will even shoot a jake. we've got a lot of turkeys, and not as many as we wish we had, but our turkey numbers are coming back strong, and a lot of states shifted their seasons and applied some stuff. We kept constant, and our numbers they're coming strong right now, and we had some fantastic hatches the past couple of years. So,
well, and I use the turkey as an example, but between that and like we just talked about this evolution of kind of the deer side for restrictions, it's, it can't be by coincidence. I think that what you guys have done, William, and the extension and Mississippi State, like the amount of communication and education is, I think, what has been foundational for you guys to be able to implement these different restrictions to continue to improve things in the state, right? Because without that communication, which frankly is where it breaks down in most states, that's why the hunting public is like, they don't want it, right? They're against it. They're abrasive to it.
Well, it also seems like you guys have a lot of like creative freedom to, like, if you think something's gonna work to benefit the herd, or your objectives internally, like you do it. Like we hear a lot of.
Well, you guys have a commission, William. So maybe talk about your structure there of like how things do get approved from from a suggestion level even.
So laws and wildlife laws are made either by our legislature or by our commission. That's a 5-person panel appointed by our governor. And so we have monthly commission meetings. They can pass rules. They can pass them on which larger scale regulations that the legislature allows them to address. For instance, the legislature says deer season will be October 1 through January 31 in this portion of the state. Commission, you decide when gun season, primitive weapon, and archery is.
Got it.
However, they do set a standard gun opener, then they can work through. So on a federal aspect, for instance, U.S. Fish and Wildlife says dove season shall be this long, this many days, and within this window of time. And so, okay, you've got this many days. Commission decides when the actual opener and closer is within that window of time to allow the maximum number of days hunting. So we have those rules. We're able to speak with our commissioners. They talk with us. We're able to speak with legislators. We have meetings with them on occasion. And so, we're right now been running some thermal surveys. For their truck mounted thermal surveys, we're running at night on areas to get an index of deer herds. So we're running like 50-mile routes and repeating those routes. And the other night, one of our commissioners rode in the truck with myself and a couple of other biologists to run that survey one night. So firsthand experience, and then they go back to help make the rules. So it helps communication again.
Mm-hmm. Seems crazy, isn't it?
It doesn't seem like it should be that hard.
Well, no, I mean, that's why I think like when you start to it's the same, it's not that different of a process as Ohio or, Pennsylvania's got it a little bit easier even than Ohio does, but Ohio, Illinois, Iowa, like those are all operating in the same way where it's commission and legislature based, right? It's just, I think a lot of it is the communication. A lot of it is probably the culture and the population of Mississippi versus some of these other states.
Yeah.
Like I would, not saying all of them, but I'd say like a lot of the legislatures are hunters and outdoorsmen or women themselves, right? Whereas, you look at a state like Illinois, not so much, right? So yeah, it's a big thing. The other big one I would say, like in the Midwest and much like the Delta, like the ag side of things is a very important stakeholder group. You guys probably, William, in a majority of the state, the timber side is a massive stakeholder in that.
It is. And, you mentioned timber companies earlier, and that's something that growing up here, to me, it's normal, but you're saying foreign in a lot of other states. The timber companies own a fair amount of land in Mississippi, so major timber companies, and they're growing trees, but they're also making a nice profit by leasing that to deer hunters.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to work with the hunting club, but also we get to work. Most of these timber companies have a biologist on staff. So we get to work with them as well. So we get to have a little bit of say-so, I'll add, within the management of those properties, because they're the owner of that property. So if they say, hey, we want you to harvest a certain number, like in the past, some of them with severely overpopulated herds started mandating they be on DMAP. And they said, you will be on DMAP and you'll have to harvest this number of deer, because the deer were eating the pine seedlings that they were going and putting in the ground after they did a clear cut harvest. So they were needing, well, it was basic deer management again. And sometimes it was, sometimes the timber company had to force the hand on it. But the leasing of land is so big in this state, and it's just another way that deer are driving our economy down here. They're one of the drivers, and they're worth so much to our state economically.
Yeah.
So,
what kind of I know I'm kind of back to DMAP here, but it's just a really intriguing program. What kind of resistance, or valid arguments, do you think there are against it? Like at this point, I know you guys did it like in 1981, and so a lot has obviously changed. We have new technologies. I don't know if the mindset is different, but if you were to try to go and impose it in a state now that didn't have it, what would you expect would be some of the pushback from either local legislature or the hunters there, or landowners, any of the stakeholders? I guess
a lot of time and staffing. So if you imagine what I just said, that we're dealing with several hundred DMAP clubs. And it is an offer. We don't go to every one every year. However, there's an offer by the biologist that is assigned those 60, 70, 80 clubs. They're offering if they would like a site visit. So a lot of our field people are going to 1, 2, or 3 different private properties a day some weeks. So they're making around, visiting with this one, visiting with that one. I'll meet you at 10 a.m. We'll ride the property. I've got to go by 1 because I'm meeting another person at 2, and they're going to ride their property as well and doing on-site visits. It takes a lot of time, and that is something that is not, we have always done it. So we have the staff, when they get hired, they realize, so it is a huge shocker on the amount of time and effort required to put boots on the ground on all these properties, and then in the spring to write these reports, because they're not auto-generated. They are a biologist looking at the data from the area, and then making direct comparisons and writing a typed up report to send to that property. So it is very time and labor intensive. So if a agency is not doing that, it would take substantial increase in funding and staffing to be able to suddenly start it on a large scale.
Yeah.
Well, and you think about, most states have some variation of like a regional biologist, but when you look at like the private land biologists of Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, Parks, you guys have quite a few private land biologists on staff.
We do,
which is a big, I won't say miss, but it's a missing piece of resources that most states do not have, right? They don't have that next level there to be able to work on that, like we talked about, that micro level or that property level type. But that's where the data is. That's where it's happening, and that's where you have to capture it. It's hard to capture it at the state level.
Well, it just is confusing to me, or it blows my mind that like the Mississippi residents and landowners and hunters seem to have such an interest in managing for deer that it's like driving a lot of these programs. I have to believe that interest is there, like in some of these other states we're talking about. It just doesn't seem like they're like, certainly the infrastructure of biologists and like some of the communication channels like that it would take to execute that, or to get people even on the same page. It just isn't there. And I guess it's got my mind kind of reeling as to how that could happen, I guess. Yeah. Is there some sort of I think I've asked this before, and I'm pretty sure the answer is a soft no, but is there a time during the year that like a lot of the states that have deer programs and stuff that you guys get together? Like, do you have an annual camping trip, right?
Well,
or something that you could gather and share ideas? Like, do certain states have frustrations that you're like, hey, we dealt with that in Mississippi, and here's what we did.
Southeast Deer Study Group is a big one for us. Yeah. Yep. And then what is it? Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. Is that what it's
It is, and we also have another meeting that is not open to the public called the Cervid Working Group meeting for the Southeast, where and primarily that's deer. A few of our southern states have a elk program, but we get together for a summer 3-day meeting. That is, so the Southeastern Deer Study Group is a time for students and to show what the universities are doing.
Research.
But the Cervid Working Group meeting is a time that we, as the deer coordinator, 1 or 2 from each Southeastern state get together. We hosted it this past year, and we get together and we just talk deer. We talk deer for about 2.5 days. And we talk about what's working, what's not. Any states allow, it's just a very casual forum there where we put a few things on the agenda, but then we give state reports for a full day. And that is, if we're doing something that we think's working, we want to share it. We want to tell you about it. And if we're having a problem, how did y'all address this? So there is, once again, we're going back to, we keep circling communication.
Yeah.
We're coming back into communication, and our group we're talking. I know nearly every one of the Southeastern deer coordinators I have in my phone, and I can pick up and call at a moment's notice and say, hey, we got this issue, wanted to talk to you about it, and we're going to answer each other. So in fact, we were having a Southeastern CWD meeting that we have every other month. And it was ongoing at the same time as this meeting. So our assistant deer coordinator, Cayman Campbell, who is from Pennsylvania, by the way.
Oh, I know him well.
Cayman was on that meeting while I'm on here.
Yeah.
So
I know Cayman well. Well, and I'll say, like, when I was in school, I got to go to the Southeast Deer Study Group. A lot of the guests that come on this podcast are from the connections of that meeting. That, I mean, I went there, for 3 or 4 years.
How big is the study group?
I don't know. Couple hundred people, few hundred people.
Yeah, it's going to be about 300 people and it's called Southeastern, but we're also going to have a contingent of folks that come from the Midwest and other states, and even sometimes a few folks from Canada.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. So it's open to everybody.
And it's very university based, from, like William said, student presentations, professor extension presentations. There's usually some state type presentations, but kind of the everybody and anybody that has a hand in deer management at a state level in those states are there.
I have to imagine.
Hey, it's going to be in Maryland this year.
I know.
That's not very far from
I know.
y'all.
I keep telling Emily we got to go back. I mean, we used to have a blast.
What are the credentials? How do you get in?
Oh, we just have to register.
Anybody can go?
Yeah, it's open to the public.
Oh, wow, really? How many what is attendance like from non, people that are working directly with the state and stuff?
Pretty low.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly deer professionals in the room.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's who you'd want there for the most part. But
there's private consultants and stuff. Like William said, the timber company biologists and stuff, like they'll be there. Like, yeah. So but not a lot of like. There always were like a handful of guys that I just.
We're here for the free stuff.
They were there. They wouldn't miss it, man. That was their thing for the year. They loved going there all the time, and yeah, it was cool to make connections there. But no, not a ton. Not a ton. It's because I guess it's.
I guess I'm imagining.
I won't say it's boring, William, but it's like it's very. It's 2 days of presentations,
right?
And then the hangouts at night are where the fun stuff happens. But
right, sure.
But the 2 days of presentations are like you're kind of in school, but it's cool because you can get up. There's an open mic. You can ask questions. Like there's really cool discussions that happen there. I mean, that's how Carl and Craig Harper and I like. I mean. Yeah, you'd be up to 2 a.m. talking to those guys and trying to solve the world's deer problems.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm envisioning as far as like every one of these deer program guys has got to have like some level of frustration with I'm trying to get this passed, or I'm trying to get like our general population to do this and that, and like I suppose it can't. There's no formal way of dealing that. It's just like let's go get a beer and.
That's pretty much what it is, and but it is a really cool place to have those discussions. And obviously, William, what you guys are doing there with the Cervid workshop is awesome. Like, I would encourage, or I wish that would be more national, frankly, right? Like, because I think there's a lot of things that Midwest and Northeast can learn.
The Northeast has a surveyed working group, and they gather, and the Midwest, and year before last, we partnered with the Midwest and had a joint deer and turkey Midwest and Southeast deer and turkey study group meeting in Kansas. I went to it. It was good to meet a lot of the Midwestern deer coordinators, talk about the problems we're looking at versus they're looking at. And it's a lot of it was daylight and dark. You come in with we got a 9-day gun season. Well, hey, we allow 3 months of gun hunting down here in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And so, how do you get enough deer harvested? Well, we might need to add another day or two. Well, we think our season's so long that people just don't go because they think
there's no pressure.
It's too windy. I'll go tomorrow. Anyhow, I learned a lot at that meeting, as a matter of fact, because things are done differently across this country, and none of them are bad. They are catered to how that agency started and how it looked at managing. Y'all have talked a lot about different management, but all the states out there, I mean, pretty well every one of the deer coordinators I've ever met are hunters themselves.
Yeah.
And they're getting out, putting boots on the ground, that's the reason they're in that job. So
I think it's a lot of kind of how the development of not just the agency, but even where they come from. I mean, obviously Mississippi State is a pipeline for MDWF&P, right? Like, I mean, that it was a factory. Like we produced biologists, they went to the state and hand in hand continue to work together. I think when you get into a lot of these other states, you don't have that just like clean working relationship and pipeline, and whether it's a state like Pennsylvania where, heck, I remember when I was at Mississippi State, I was trying to apply for jobs here and I couldn't because I had a Mississippi driver's license and not a Pennsylvania driver's license. I wasn't even allowed to apply for the civil service job. And it was like, wait a minute, like I grew up there. I want to come back and like manage and improve the resource in my home state. I can't even apply for the job because I'm not a state resident. Well, that doesn't seem right. Like I want the best people that I can possibly get my hands on, right? And so I think there's just state limitations that happen, and I just ultimately I've said it a bunch, but I think that Mississippi is just, they've done it right for a long time, and you do it for long enough, and that's just the culture that the hunters are raised in. Like the kids that are coming into hunting in Mississippi, all they know is DMAP and killing 3-year-olds and older and passing deer and longer hunting seasons, and we got to shoot does, and that's just what they know.
I gotta say, it seems like it's working. I mean, you seem pretty content in your position, and I don't hear anybody from Mississippi complaining. So
yeah,
good.
I'm
for
sure
you.
there's some people shaking the tree a little bit. There always are.
Oh yeah, the tree gets shook it rattles quite often, but overall, we've got a really good thing here, and a deer herd. Once again, I stress the importance in a rural state. You just take that into venison and how important that is. That's over 9 million pounds of venison that we're harvesting in those deer every year, and we've got less than 3 million people. You start doing the math, how important is that across our state? And our state is, like my family is being raised on venison.
Yeah.
We eat it way more than any other protein out there.
Yeah.
So it's very important. The hunting culture here, from food plots to leasing land to trying to grow older age class deer to processors, taxidermists, it's just a big culture here, and that's a good thing. We got some threats to it in the form of disease and a few others. We have a CWD outbreak, and we have it in a few places in the state, 16 counties now. When we're getting hunters to help us battle that. So,
crazy, man.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think at some point
it's been a really encouraging discussion.
Well, I think at some point I'd love to, maybe it's in the off season here, but have a deeper discussion of some of the things that are going on there in the state. And I think just as a big general overview, I mean, one thing that we've done, unfortunately, is we've neglected the South in a lot of our conversations. And and it's because I think just people, from these higher deer density states don't have the mindset to wrap around that, deer management is being done there and being done very successfully. And so, yeah, man, I William, as always, good catching up, and appreciate you coming on and kind of talking with us. But yeah, I think if anybody listening to this, they're thinking, maybe Mississippi is the Iowa of the South. I don't know. It's possible.
We got some really good deer and a lot of older deer. And body wise, one of my clubs, I was telling Jared before we started when we were visiting, and one of my clubs sent me a picture of the scale the other day as he was cranking the deer up. And he had it on the winch, and it kept going, and it topped at 303. And it was 148-inch 8-point, and it scored.
Man.
I mean, he weighed 303. And we see 300-pound deer every year.
Yeah.
The biggest I've seen was 366 killed on one of our wildlife management areas. It was a buck, of course. And that's not common, but it's not uncommon to harvest 250-pound bucks in our state over a large portion of it. So we've got some really big deer in our better portions, our well-managed portions of the state, that are keeping deer numbers under control on our better soil, like our Delta soil.
Yeah.
Those deer I just mentioned both come out of our Delta region, a lot of agriculture, some really great deer. So,
well, I remember we had 2 bucks in the Delta region during our program when we were doing capturing and stuff. And at 3 years old, both of those deer were over 215 pounds. And so, yeah, just, and they had the frame to just keep packing it on. Like they just were stout structurally deer. But yeah, man, well, W, we appreciate it, buddy. Thanks for spending some time for us. I hope you and the family have a fantastic Christmas, and stick around here for a second while we wrap this up, and we'll talk to you here. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Quest Hunt Co.
Man, it seems like as technology and social media and stuff just gets incorporated into our daily lives in the deer season more and more, it's like we're always looking for ways to just dial it back, spend more quality time with deer hunters, and really make deer hunting and deer camps great again.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all been part of that annual buck pull, whether it's at your camp or the local fire department, and we're trying to bring that feeling back with Quest Hunt Co. to be able to compete against other people in your state, but also be part of a national competition.
You can sign up in as many states as you want to enter deer that at the end are going to get scored, and you have an opportunity to win some big prizes. And there's an in-person banquet in February that Jeremy and I are going to be at, where those prizes are going to get held out. I think we're going to do some sort of whatever, live podcast or speaking, we'll figure that out. But just looking forward to spending time with people who sign up for the tournament.
Yeah, so you can go to Quest Hunt Co. and sign up. Use the code HUNTR15 at checkout. They'll save you a little bit of money, and then hopefully we'll be able to see you in Missouri in February of 25 at the annual convention.
To make this season a quest.
For all you Southerners, you're welcome.
Boy, what a different world.
Isn't it? It is, man. It's, it's been 10 years, 14 years since I left there. And for those 3 or 4 years that I was there hunting, that's how I would describe it to people when I came back. I'm like, it's a whole different world, not just like culturally, because it is, but the way that they manage, the way that the public lands were,
the outlook on management is just
even the hunting pressure. Like, dude, I remember to William's point, like I remember going out gun hunting, and it was like, well, tomorrow's opening day, and it was like, weather sucks. Like, I'm just not going to go. And there was no pressure because I had 7 weeks to gun hunt. And
wow,
so,
7 weeks.
Yeah, it was like the gun season opened basically around the 3rd Saturday in November.
Yeah.
And it, between primitive weapon and other stuff, it closed in January.
Well, that's what's so intriguing.
End of
is
January.
Like, as you run down the list of like liberalizations, it seems like they have so many of them, like long season dates. They have, Mississippi is a bait state.
Super high bag limits.
High bag limits, all these allowances, or opportunities essentially. And yet they're able to still, have a very healthy deer herd. And it seems like a pretty satisfied demographic of hunters.
Very much so.
So like, that whole conversation there, I'm trying to tease apart, like, okay, so what is the difference? And there are some, they have less hunters overall. And
I think they have more deer space. Like it's just rural.
More
the
habitat.
whole state is rural.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have Jackson, Mississippi, and you have Biloxi, like down on the coast, and you've got like, but other than that, it's just rural.
It's a very rural state. Yeah.
So there's just deer space everywhere.
And also, I think that just inherently, like whether it's the soils or the genetics or whatever it is, genetics would cover this, I guess, but just literally the subspecies of deer that's down there, they just don't get as big.
The Delta deer do.
Antler-wise.
The Delta deer do.
Do they?
I mean, if you're hunting, not every part, but if you're hunting a good chunk of that Mississippi Delta, it's like you're hunting the Midwest.
Okay.
Body-wise and antler-wise for deer.
Wow.
I mean, they're killing 190+ inch deer over there.
Yeah.
I mean, Tyler Jordan just over the river in Louisiana just killed a typical 203 that netted 192.
Crazy.
Monster.
Yeah.
There's been multiple 200s killed this year in Mississippi.
Wow.
When you get towards like the middle part, like if you get away from the Delta, then you have to hug the river systems. So the river bottoms, like
when you say the Delta, it's like farmland primarily, like
farmland, swamps. Yeah.
Okay.
So there is the Delta that is above the levee, and then there's the Delta that's in the levee. In the levee meaning it floods. The Mississippi River floods that area, right? Islands and stuff like that. Outside of the Delta, very much farmland, flat, like pocket, blocky woods type stuff. Then you get into like the more of the hill country.
Other states have that, right? Like if you just
everywhere
like,
up and down the Mississippi
jump on
River.
Spartan Forge or something, you go on like any state, along the Mississippi River, you'll see
Arkansas has it, Tennessee's,
but they don't call it the Delta in other states, right? It's just
Louisiana and Mississippi call it the Delta.
Yeah, and so
maybe Arkansas too.
In those states, is it much?
It's broader
or wider. There's a lot more of it, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
And then so you've got that, and then you've got what I consider is like decent ground in the middle. It's like the hill country, but you need to start hugging the river bottoms. Like the Big Black River is like one of the premier river bottoms in Mississippi, where it's very fertile soil.
They call it the Big Black River?
That's what it is.
Wow.
That's exactly what it's called.
Okay.
Very fertile soil. Yeah, it is. So yeah, but that's where you want property. You want property along those river bottoms and or the Delta. Beyond that, like you can kill the age structure is just as good in even the coastal plain.
Right.
Like the age structure is good. The deer just aren't big. You know, the environment can't support them.
Huh. I was always under the impression that it was a subspecies thing. Like, do you think that there's a difference in like the type of deer that are in the Delta as opposed that are in like some of those other areas, or is it strictly nutrition?
It definitely seems like the more we went on that its environment and nutrition kind of in one.
Yeah.
In that like the nutrition's not there, so they can't put on the antlers, but the environment has restricted them that their skeletal structures are smaller, thus they weigh less. It takes longer to break the environmental barrier, right? Because it's skeletal structure. But if you give those deer the same quality of nutrition over a few years, they can explode the antlers basically. Yeah. So they're still there. It's just, it's the same line. And part of that was because of the restocking and stuff that we looked at that happened in Mississippi. But those Delta deer, I mean, are monsters. It very much is like, I mean, it's the pivotal swamp donkey.
Yeah.
It's
the old swamp donkey.
250-pound mature, 140 to 160 inch, 8 and 10 points.
Yeah.
Dark antlers. For whatever reason, they always look like that, like just straight up, just heavy, gnarly fighters.
Yeah, that one Tyler killed was a freaking monster.
That's
a giant.
Yeah. Congrats, Tyler, if you're listening.
Yeah, dude.
But yeah, it's a cool state. The DMAP thing, the amount of data, I'll find. I've got some, and maybe I'll get Nick to drop it in. But it used to be that these guys it'd be a Mississippi Deer Program book. And like you could literally know the average basal circumference of a 4-year-old buck in the Delta. Like it had that much, and it would tell you that it was from 1,000 buck samples or 150 buck samples. Like all of it was out there for your interpretation, and you had Mississippi State in the extension office just continuing to tell you how practically to use that to improve your own stuff. And I think, and it's hard, to think back, but yeah, it's been 14 years. So like, since that 15 years ago, like people just are implementing it and the state has progressed. I mean, 80% of your buck harvest is over 3.5. kudos to you guys. Like, holy shit, that is unbelievable.
It's so interesting.
You're experiencing the deer experience right now.
It's so interesting. Just the belief aspect of that, like, seems to play such a role. It's like in Mississippi, they exist, and I'm talking about, mature deer. They exist because the hunters there believe, or they've seen it. You know what I mean? Like, the state implemented something like an antler restriction at one time, or maybe there's just a cultural thing that we don't know. It's like unspoken or whatever, but they're like, hey, this can happen. Like, we're excited about the fact that you saw it in Pennsylvania, when we had Gary Alt on and we talked about, like, guys saw a bigger deer for the first time and they're like, yeah, we want that. They can't believe that they exist. They're like, that's from right over here.
There's still a few people shaking the tree, but nobody in Pennsylvania wants to go back. Like, we're killing the biggest deer we've ever killed.
Right. Well, and so it just makes you wonder, we can't help but feel in a rut sometimes where it's like you just see everybody's like, oh, you can't have, like, there's just such a dismay about, like, or a disbelief, Frank, that it can continue to happen because of there's such high demand and such little supply. So I wonder what it would take at this point in 2024, or who would have, what would have to happen there for people to, like, I know they still want it, whether they say they don't, but to believe that it could happen again.
Well, I think the other thing that kind of, hearing William talk and how everything is right now, first of all, probably the most comfortable guy from a deer program coordinator that we've had a conversation with. Dude's like, yeah, everything, it's great here.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like,
and we've heard that before, and we're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he was really satisfied with how things are going.
He's like,
things
we're
are
doing
good.
it. We're doing
Mississippi's
it.
all right.
Things are doing good. But if, what's crazy is, like, you think about, like you just said, liberal seasons, liberal bag limits, sure, smaller hunter numbers and by 100,000 or 200,000, depending where you're at. But, like, they can't kill enough deer, and they're killing a bunch of deer, but they can't kill enough deer, and they're making a better age class. You go to some of these other states, whether it's even, we've heard it from Iowa here recently, but Illinois especially, and it's like, these deer herds are decimated.
Well, you can sprinkle this in. I mean, we chatted there for a bit after the podcast, but, like, he believes a big part of the reason they can't kill enough deer is because they instituted baiting in the state of Pennsylvania.
How wild is that? What?
Yeah, he's like, we started allowing baiting, and we didn't go all the way. That'll be for another podcast, I guess.
The deer are lazy.
He said the deer don't move anymore, so guys don't kill them, and so they have an issue now where they can't kill enough deer because they implemented baiting, which is funny, in contrast to our conversation with states like Ohio or other states that are doing it. It's like they are keeping it in place
like
because
a
crush because they feel like they will lose hunters. And I think it just, like we've said before, it's having the exact opposite effect.
And hunters are saying we can't kill deer without bait, and it couldn't be more opposite. It's like you're not killing enough deer because of bait.
Yeah, that corn culture, man.
It is. So awesome, man. Well, it was cool to get William on. We kind of talked to him there. We're going to have to get him back here in kind of the off season and really start to dive in. Those guys are still doing a power research. I know some of the guys that are now going to be moving into the MSU Deer Lab, and we'll try to bring those guys back. But Mississippi doing it right.
Pretty cool.
Pretty cool. So anyways, we appreciate you guys listening to this episode of HUNTR Podcast with William McKinley from Mississippi Department of Wildlife and Fishery Parks.
W.
Yeah, W. And the W before. Actually, no, we called him W around the George W time frame. So that would have been
appropriate.
It was very lined up at that time. So, but we appreciate W for coming on. Appreciate everybody listening. We'll catch you next week.
Later.
Take me